unpack the real issues affecting the Tasman nations, this is Trans-Tasman Talk. Jointly produced by the Unshackled.net and rightminds.nz. Now here's Tim Willems in Australia and Dewey DeBoer in New Zealand. Rightminds.nz. Now here's Tim Willems in Australia and Dewey DeBoer in New Zealand.
Hello everyone and welcome to this week's show. The date is Tuesday, the 10th of December 2019. It is 7 p.m. here in Melbourne.
And it is 9 p.m. here in Auckland.
And of course, today's a very significant day in internet history. Some people are calling it D-Day because that is when YouTube's new terms of service come in, when they can delete you for simply commercial reasons. So we're live on the Unshackled's channel for now.
And we're also live on the Right Minds channel for now, and that feed should be embedded on the bfd.co.nz as well. And good evening to those of you in the chat. I see we're having a few filter in now. And yes, as long as our channel remains commercially viable, which I'm sure we are, absolutely commercially viable to YouTube, they'll be keeping us on the air. They will be.
Well, our Unshackled channel is still part of the YouTube monetization program. So on this live feed, if you're in the live chat, you can send us through a super chat, which helps financially support not just this show, but also the work of the Unshackled. So do it while you still can.
And you can, of course, support us other ways as well on our websites in case anything happens to YouTube monetization. I suppose I should make the announcement now, but I'll make it a little bit later. Amy, my wife, did give birth to a baby girl on Friday. So I've got a new daughter, and I'm going to be a little bit sleep deprived, and I've been very busy. So Tim is going to be doing all the heavy lifting on tonight's show. And we will cut it short. And I always say when we cut it short, but it's going to be cut short for real this time because Amy needs a little bit of extra help, as you can imagine.
Yes, that's perfectly understandable. I was glad that all went well with the birth. It was last Friday, I believe. It all looked. I was able to see the Facebook post. I wasn't able to interact with it because it was my first 3-day Facebook ban beginning on Friday. I got off that 3-day ban on Monday, and then I got another 3-day ban. And this was the first one was for posting a link to my interview with Blair Cottrell. He is deemed a dangerous individual by Facebook, so that violated their community standards on preventing offline harm. And then I got another 3-day ban for simply mentioning his name. So he's basically one of the Voldemorts of Facebook.
Yes, it's an interesting way that they pick their targets on who they try to delete as well. You know, they say, oh, this is all about safety and people who are causing harm. But usually these people who are targeted are not the ones that are causing harm in the same way that, they have all of their favorite rappers and, entertainers and so on who regularly or routinely sing about violence and, all kinds of violent behavior and murder and rape and so on, and that's all okay. The people who sing about this and will glorify this. But if you're somebody who is, a peaceful activist on a cause that they deem contrary to the system, if you're opposing their system, then they will shut you down.
But the left will cry free speech being violated if the ABC takes down the Q&A episodes where Mona Ethaway said maybe we need to murder 1 million men.
And that is, and I can agree with them there. Is they shouldn't be taking those episodes down because we all want to know what's going on there. And that's the left might be crying free speech there, but what are they doing? They're covering up the violent calls of one of their own, and so that people can't access it or have more trouble accessing it.
I'm just pointing out the hypocrisy there, that they don't
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that it's dangerous for somebody to say on national TV, maybe we need to kill 1 million men to defeat the patriarchy.
Yes, and that would be a far better example of dangerous speech than somebody who, I'm not entirely sure what Blair Cottrell wants, but I'm sure it's nothing on the magnitude of killing 1 million people.
We have been informed now that because, as I've mentioned on previous episodes, he's appealing his blasphemy conviction from 2017 under Victoria's Racial and Religious Tolerance Act that was in 2015, when the United Patriots Front were campaigning against the approval of a mosque in Bendigo. They beheaded a dummy which had fake blood pouring out. So he was charged and convicted of inciting serious contempt, ridicule, revulsion of Muslims. We will find out what the judge's decision is, Chief Judge of the County Court, Peter Kidd, on Thursday, the 19th of November. So we will know before Christmas. So it'll be a pretty important decision, I'd say, basically, because there are 3 issues at hand. There is whether the judge finds or maintains Blair's initial conviction that he intended, which is, well, they've got to get inside his brain to find that. Then there's also, is the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities consistent with the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act, and also the Australian constitutional implied freedom to political communication. So it's, yeah, there's a lot of obviously questions for the judge to consider. My videos where I've interviewed him and also covered his trial, nothing's happened to them on YouTube yet, so I can still say his name and provide information about him on YouTube. I just can't mention any of this on Facebook.
We had another court case that was cancelled this week, I believe. Israel Folau, obviously, as most people will know, settled with Rugby Australia, and they gave him a settlement, which is all, what do you say,
out of court settlement.
But like a secret,
confidential amount.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
And so there's been wild speculation about what the figure was.
But I think more importantly is what they were going for there was a precedent court case in a similar fashion around employment and religious beliefs. That case won't happen anymore, and I've seen some arguments, some good arguments there on both sides on why it's actually good that they settled, on why it's, maybe he should have fought it through to the end. I think what will happen with your Religious Discrimination Act in Australia will be interesting. I think his case probably will have impacted that to quite a degree already.
Well, we have had Scott Morrison with the Attorney General, Christian Porter, today in Sydney, of all places, when the city is basically consumed with smoke-induced haze. They announced that they had revised the initial draft of the Religious Discrimination Act, so it'll expand the definition of religious body so that these organisations will be able to hire and fire staff based on religious grounds and beliefs, but it'll also narrow the scope that health practitioners can object to treating patients. You can't object to treating the patient only to a procedure. So, for example, if a transgender person comes to your clinic with a medical problem not to do with their gender transition, you would have to treat them. But if you had to inject them with estrogen or testosterone, depending on what transition they are, you could refuse to do that.
It sounds reasonable to me. And I think the argument that people were making in terms of, they should have pushed this court case through to get a precedent set. There's both sides to that. One is obviously the people who win in these defamation cases and employment cases
Oh, it's
are always
an
the
unfair.
lawyers, right?
Yeah,
If they were to go
yeah.
all the way through, they spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on these lawyers. And now, as it is, the money is, still there. The people who want their money back can get it back, and the rest of it can go, to the is it ACL?
Australian Christian
ACL.
Lobby.
Yeah, the
They
Australian Christian Lobby. Yeah.
because
Yeah, they
they
hold it in trust, and they will use it for their other activities or other court cases related to this. So I would see it as a positive outcome, regardless of where you sit on this.
most people who donated to the ACL crowdfunding are pretty content for the ACL to keep the money for future activism and religious liberty related issues. And of course, background, he initially used GoFundMe Israel Folau to crowdfund his legal case, but that violated GoFundMe's terms of service, and so the Australian Christian Lobby, they decided to, because he and the director Martin Iles, they've become quite close. Israel Folau was at their recent national conference. But yes, the figure everyone's been speculating, the figure that's been bounced around is 8 million. Raylene Castle, the New Zealand citizen CEO of Rugby Australia, she said that's wildly inaccurate. And well, if she thought that this had basically stopped the scrutiny of her administration of the game, she's just managed to botch the next Rugby Australia broadcast rights deal with Foxtel. That's fallen through, so she's either got to renegotiate with Foxtel or find maybe if Optus is interested. And I've spoken to you about before whether this is Raylene Castle being the CEO and now having a New Zealand coach of the Wallabies, whether this is some foreign interference operation on behalf of the New Zealand government to destroy Australian rugby, because it's going pretty well.
Yes, sadly, our government is not really capable of such a masterstroke, but it is something I support entirely. It's good to see Australian rugby down in the gutter and struggling, and I think when something like this happens, people always say, Australian rugby or whichever organization is, it can be in New Zealand as well. It can be even related to schools, and they say, we don't like this decision. This is the worst thing ever. And then they keep paying their fees, and they keep watching the games, they keep turning up to the games, and they keep supporting this organization. So they're not really willing to put their money where their mouths are in terms of putting the financial pressure on these organizations. So it's good to see that the pressure is being accidentally applied via incompetence.
Well, in AFL, because I'm not sure if you follow Aussie rules much, but the AFL is probably the most politically correct sport in Australia, which of course is headquartered in Melbourne. But the administration, if they go too far, then the fans revolt, because Adam Goodes, when he got Australian of the Year, was promoting the black armband view of Australian history, that white Europeans raped and pillaged with it. He was booed off the AFL stage. He retired hurt, basically, because of all the booing. And when they had the behavioural awareness officers, who former Victorian Premier Jeff Kennett pointed out, not many of them look like locals or fans of the game. The AFL quickly backed down, saying we'll scrap them, because the AFL fans, they're pretty passionate, and if they're pushed with the PC stuff too far, they'll revolt.
Well, New Zealand this week has quite tragically had an eruption of a very different kind. The White Island out the coast of Whakatane has erupted several days ago now, and I say several days, I believe.
Yesterday.
I missed out. Was it yesterday? Okay.
Yes.
Everything over the past few days is a bit of a blur for me because of the baby and everything. So that was yesterday, and I believe the death toll's not yet been confirmed, but we're up to probably about a dozen or so have died. Thankfully, a large number of people who were on the island were rescued. There were about 100 or so people there at the time, and there was no real warning that was given. There were apparently some indication signs. There's a criminal investigation that's going to be
Oh,
done.
well, that's
to see
been
if
walked
it's
back now.
liable.
They said criminal
Okay.
investigation, but it's going to be a coroner's inquest.
Okay.
Because yeah, that did surprise me. That criminal. That's a bit. You haven't even
Yeah.
investigated with anyone's at fault. Are you going to charge the volcano? That's sort of what it.
Well, well, based on some of the opinions of some journalists, such as claiming that the volcano, and I've got the headline here somewhere, is was an angry volcano.
Well, there's still 8 missing, but they're presumed dead because basically rescue efforts, well, they've been hindered because it's too dangerous to go to the island, and there's been no signs of life detected. Obviously, there is concerns for. There are 13 Australians who are in hospital, a lot of them with severe injuries and burns, because obviously it was quite a violent volcano eruption, and it's
Yes, they were from the footage. You could see clearly the rapidly moving hot gases, and the burns that the victims of this would have sustained would be quite horrific, and that's what the reports say. I've been following it rather sporadically, but the last I heard from the island is they have probably identified some bodies. But they can't actually go in there and retrieve them, and it's not like anybody left could have survived what happened there.
It was well known that it was an active volcano. Obviously, it's a privately owned island, so we've been told that it's administered by the local authority there, and obviously there's tours there, and so people are asking why were people allowed to go on the island if it was an active volcano. My answer to that is surely people would know that this is an active volcano and that it could erupt. It would sort of be a case of buyer beware, I would say. But of course, in a lot of consumer law, we treat consumers are deemed to be stupid and have to have everything set out for them.
And this is why I thought when I first heard the criminal investigation, I thought, okay, well, that makes sense because, with regards to consumer law, maybe they had not adequately warned people of the dangers of the volcano, or maybe some of the warning signs had been ignored. But yeah, I suppose we'll see that in the inquiry that goes through. Because there have been several eruptions. Like, it is an active volcano. People should know it's an active volcano. But usually people would assume to get some kind of warning, right? To say, okay, well, have hours or even days worth of warnings to say, hey, look, pressure is building up. It's getting more dangerous.
And that's what people are looking at now.
And as far as we know that, those warnings weren't given, even though I have seen some early reports that there were some signs of increased activity, but they weren't considered to be abnormal, and that
which
will wait
obviously will change. But I think certainly people won't be touring an active volcano for a while. And as I mentioned in the promo for this show, we shouldn't consider a tragedy like this political in any way, because it's an act of nature, or some people would call it an act of God. The volcanoes are not. It's not climate change induced. In fact, the emissions from the volcano that will significantly increase the carbon dioxide in the air, because that is a debate about climate change. There's so many contested about how much CO2 in proportion to our own emission reductions will counter that. But yes, it's a natural disaster which is 100% natural.
Yes, and I believe it was last week's show I even mentioned, when we were talking about the zero carbon bill, and this may have been 2 weeks ago now, I did say, volcanic eruptions are responsible for a lot of climate change. A lot of change in the climate is caused by the eruptions of not necessarily the CO2, but the ash that is spewed into the atmosphere keeps and if there's a large enough quantity of it, it actually can affect the local climate and even the global climate for years to come. It will actually can cause a cooling effect when you have large volcanic eruptions. This one doesn't seem to be too large, but we have to wait, and see what the outcome of this is. But there you go again, right? All of the attempts of the government to reduce CO2 output, and the country, the Earth itself increases its CO2 output far beyond any reductions that the government is making.
And just today, there was a 5.9 magnitude earthquake in the Bay of Plenty, which is in the North Island. Nobody was injured, but it was certainly felt, and it was not related to the volcano eruption. But yeah, it sort of reminded people that New Zealand, it's in terms of, well, volcanoes, earthquakes, it's because there were two earthquakes in Christchurch during when John Key was Prime Minister. And when I travelled over to New Zealand to cover your general election in September 2017, I took a tour of the Parliament House in Wellington, and which is actually, they've made it earthquake proof. And I was scheduled to fly out Wellington on the Friday night, but because Wellington, it's a really windy city, all flights were grounded. So yes, it's always been a place of extreme nature.
Mm-hmm. Yes, New Zealand is, on in the ring of fire. So we have a huge amount of earthquakes. The 5.4 earthquake today, I believe, was not too significant in terms of damage. It was rather a sort of a standard treat. It was a very standard event here in New Zealand that I've seen. Again, I am not up to date on the latest news because of having a baby, but the storms that we had over the weekend in the South Island have been very, very damaging. A number of major roads have been wiped out, and I read somewhere that the west coast. It is the East Coast, was basically cut in half on the South Island, where all of the major roads were wiped out, and people can't travel up and down the country. And so those are the kinds of weather events that are very regular here in New Zealand in terms of wind and rain and earthquakes and even volcanoes. And of course, they're all natural events that are not induced by man.
Yes, earthquakes because of tectonic plate fault lines. We all remember that from when schools actually taught proper geography. So you can't blame either of these. The earthquake thankfully didn't injure anyone this time, but both earthquake and volcano eruptions, which natural in New Zealand, man can't do anything about it. And you also can't blame white men for it as well.
No, most definitely not. Thankfully, there have been, there has been no politicization of the climate events in New Zealand the last few days. I believe there has been some criticism of Jacinda sort of handling all of the PR of the White Island eruption, but I'm inclined to give a bit of leeway there, especially because most of the people who there were foreign tourists. It does become more of an international relations and international image issue with regards to tourism in New Zealand and the safety of tourists in New Zealand, because we have had a few very bad stories of tourists dying in New Zealand, whether by accident or being murdered. I see you have triggered the comment section, by the way, saying that white men cannot be blamed because it is White Island, and so therefore you can blame the white man who named the island.
What's its Maori name?
I had never heard it before today, and I can't remember it. It starts with a W and it has a few A's in it. That's what I remember.
Well, in the city of Sydney, I've mentioned to you on previous shows that the state of New South Wales, it's basically had bushfires raging all throughout the entire coast of the state, and the city of Sydney beginning last week, and it's really reached new heights today. The Sydney haze from the smoke from the bushfires. Well, Sydney is surrounded by a lot of bushland, so the air quality index has been measured as 11 times above what is considered hazardous levels, and so people are wearing well not just face masks but actual like gas masks now, and people are told to stay indoors. A lot of places of work are being closed. And so yes, it's because the pictures of it, I should have saved some, but you can basically just it's all over social media. People just taking photos of them. It basically looks like it is a scorched earth in Sydney, and of course. Climate change advocates and people in the media and on Twitter are saying that, how much more proof do you need that we're in a climate emergency? Though it should be pointed out that this haze is only in the city of Sydney because it's the state of New South Wales which has had most of the bushfires. I'm in the city of Melbourne. There's certainly no haze. We had a hot day yesterday, so there was some bushfires broke out in East Gippsland. Like there were some bushfires that broke out when we had our last hot day a couple of weeks ago. It's been a very cool summer here in Melbourne. The temperatures dropped right back down today. I think this is one of the coldest summers that we've ever had in Melbourne, but it seems that these days, whenever there is a huge increase in the temperature, and it's a very hot day, that bushfires seem to break out, and they're all blamed on climate change, even though I just said that it's been a very cool summer, and a lot of them are being deliberately lit. I would say probably the firebugs that we have in Australia, they're our version of the US mass shooters, given the destruction that they cause. And obviously we've talked about how you're not a lot of farmers are not allowed to declare their lands. The national parks have been locked up, so backburning, or they can't be they can't get rid of all the fuel, and obviously there is much more infrastructure than there was. But yes, even though, well, despite all those factors that I mentioned, it's climate change. That's the first thing. Even though climate change is supposed to be about increase in the global temperature, but of course they've mixed in that it causes extreme weather events, which how is CO2 meant to induce more extreme weather events?
And what makes the news in your country is the weather in your country. And so therefore, whatever the weather is in your country is going to be linked to climate change no matter what. And obviously all the politicians jump on board. There's no real left or right divide anymore on climate change. Obviously we've got the National Party and Simon Bridges here in New Zealand, and even the ACT Party all say, oh yeah, climate change is real and we need to do something about it, and they kind of just disagree on the level to which we should damage our economy.
Yes, you don't want to be a climate denier.
And that's kind of the thing. And so they're climate deniers behind closed doors, right? If you have a conversation with them, if you want to sit down with Simon Bridges or anybody, David Seymour, and you would say, well, you really believe in this climate change stuff, they'd be like, oh, no, I don't, but we need it for the vote. We need to pretend like we do for the votes. And I think you've got a similar issue in Australia there with Scott Morrison's government even.
Yes, the miserable ghost of Malcolm Turnbull returned again last night. He called all the other ex-PM miserable ghosts. He seems to be turned into the biggest one. He was on the final episode of Q&A for the year last night, which was also host Tony Jones's final show. He's going overseas to join his fellow ABC journalist, who's his wife Sarah Ferguson, which is something you don't see very often a man following, going with his wife to pursue her career, though he'd been the host of that show for 10 years. But he wasn't on the panel that night with all those feminists, well, because he is not a woman. They've always given him the sack when they've had a International Women's Day special or some feminist festival special. Though basically over the years the program has got more and more out of control. It began when some hippie looking guy threw his shoes at former Prime Minister John Howard over the Iraq War. There was a socialist alternative live protest against, I can't remember, Christopher Pyne was the education minister at the time, and also John Roskin from the IPA was on the panel at that time. Yeah, there's been various disruptions. The show's got more and more out of control. And it wasn't that bad to begin with in 2009, but as the political discourse has got more toxic, the show has just degenerated. And every question last night was from the far left, which they don't just let randoms ask questions. They're handpicked by the producers, so say no more. But Malcolm Turnbull said that
it's a Q&A show, but the questions are all theirs and the answers are all theirs too.
Yes, it's the show where you get to ask the questions that we've pre-approved. That's how I term it. But yes, Malcolm Turnbull said that the Morrison government, they weren't doing enough on climate change, and that his treasurer and energy minister at the time, which are now the leader and deputy, Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg, they were supportive of the National Energy Guarantee, which was his energy policy, which was the catalyst for him losing the prime ministership. But they're being held to ransom by the far right climate deniers in the Liberal Party. And he said that when there's homes are going up in flames and the farmers don't have water, that climate change, it's now a national security issue. Is he saying that ASIO, they should send intelligence into the air to measure things?
Well, you know what? By that, what he really means is that they're going to be knocking down your door to make sure you are prosecuted for climate crimes or crimes against the climate. That's where it's headed, and that's what they're after. But all of this climate change talk, and I was just thinking with the haze and the air quality in Sydney, I'm wondering if it's as bad as Beijing.
Yes, it actually is worth Shanghai today. That's what they've said. It's what people have been making the joke that that the Chinese who bought properties in Sydney to get away from the haze, the haze has followed them.
But yes, so the this is sort of the haze is unfortunate and entirely natural, and it will go away. But there are people in the world, especially in China, who live with this kind of haze that's produced by their own economy and coal plants. They're building one or two coal plants every single month, and they keep decreasing their air quality. And in many places throughout the West, 30 or 40 years ago, the air quality was just as bad. People will have seen pictures or even have experienced for themselves the air quality in places like Los Angeles and London, which used to just be a haze, and people would actually have to wear masks and go out in the street, and people would die from the bad air quality. And all of that, thankfully, has been cleaned up by increases in technology and actually more CO2, because CO2 is a nice clean burning gas. Same thing as the water vapor, and those are the two kind of the two main pollutants, if we could say, that come from burning petroleum, and those are the kinds of gases you want to be releasing into the atmosphere, rather than all of the other toxins, especially from coal, that end up affecting the air quality in a really bad way.
Well, the founding of the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, well, the catalyst for that was the Ohio River catching fire, which of course is pretty amazing for a water river to catch fire. But yes, as we've just been discussing, this is not the result of pollution. It's because there are bushfires, and well,
Exactly.
it's happening all throughout the state. And Sydney is surrounded by bushes and mountains. So, but yeah, as I
And
said,
it will clear. It will clear. You know, it's going to be like that for a very short amount of time, and then the air quality in Sydney will be as clean as you would normally expect, but it's still going to be bad in Shanghai, right? So it might be worse in Shanghai today, but in a week or in a few weeks, they're stuck with their air quality, and we over here can experience good air quality because we have advanced industrial economies that don't need to pump the air and the water full of pollutants.
well, it was brought to my attention today that Sydney, they had a fire-induced haze in 2013, 6 years ago, and it was pointed out to me that everyone's forgotten about that, and we seem to have memories of goldfishes, that we don't remember that there were fires and other natural disasters even worse than what we're experiencing today.
And I would believe that there's nothing that's particularly getting worse in terms of fires and so on, especially because all of this will burn off. Like, this one is bad, but everything that's being burnt off is not going to be replaced very quickly to burn off again. So you can either via manual labor and proper forest management clear the dead wood yourself, do regular burn offs and so on, or else it's going to build up over time and you're going to get bad fires. And the closer these bad fires are together, the less bad they're going to be. The further apart they are, the more damaging they're going to be when they do happen.
Well, the reason why as I established, we have these bushfires at the moment, and also we're in a drought, is not because we're in an actual drought or fire season, is because our governments and bureaucrats, they're not managing water and fire prevention properly. I mean, it's when they talk about man-induced climate change, this is basically with the mismanagement of the Murray-Darling Basin. That's a man-made drought, and of course with the fuel build-ups, because we've got to preserve the natural environment, basically not intervening, not man doing anything. That has caused this. So it's a man-made disaster by not doing what we used to do.
Exactly. And speaking of man-made disasters, or possibly one being cleaned up, there have been a whole bunch of further developments on the refugee situation in the past week. We were hoping that your medevac laws would be repealed, and I believe that's happened.
Yes.
Perhaps you can give us some insight into that process. And the Iranian refugee writer who came to New Zealand, Behrouz Boochani, he potentially might be claiming, seeking asylum in New Zealand. And there have been talks of a secret backdoor deal done between Jacinda Ardern and Scott Morrison to bring all of the Nauru refugees and Manus Island refugees to New Zealand.
Yes, everyone suspects that was the secret condition that Morrison agreed with Jackie Lambie to get her crucial vote in the Senate to pass the Medivac reveal, because she said she couldn't reveal it because of national security reasons. But most people believe that she wanted this deal with New Zealand finalised. In terms of your new asylum seeker that you've got, well, he's an award-winning author and journalist. So all I can say is lucky you.
Just what we need are more of these left-wing award-winning journalists in New Zealand. They're already, we have a very terrible plague of them already.
Yeah.
But there's a very possibility that stuff is actually going bust at the moment. They're supposedly bleeding a lot of money. So several of the news organizations in New Zealand are starting to no longer be financially viable, because it's kind of like the game is up, right? Everyone knows that they're just peddling
Yes.
their left-wing
Stuff
Marxist
is owned
opinions.
by Fairfax, which is an Australian-based media organisation, which they controlled previously the Age, Sydney Morning Herald, Financial Review. Then they merged with the Nine Network, and they've also acquired the Macquarie Radio Network, which is 2GB and Alan Jones, and they've actually been doing much better now that there's been this merger because, as we've mentioned, the rivers of advertising gold that they used to have, they're diminishing like quicksand, and so they've got to pool their resources together. And so Nine and Fairfax have done that quite well for the time being. But Channel 7, they had to slash a lot of their news and current affairs coverage recently for cost cutting. They axed their Sunday night news magazine program. They axed Today Tonight in Adelaide and Perth, and where they're just having extended news bulletins now. And well, the cheapest form of entertainment that the free-to-air networks can put on now is reality TV. So Channel 7, they're bringing
I could have
back
predicted that one.
yeah, Big Brother is back
As soon as you
next
said the
year.
the cheapest thing they could put on, I thought, that's got to be reality TV. And so there has been talk in New Zealand as well of them trying to merge with, I believe, NZME, which is New Zealand Herald and so on.
Yes, what's happening with Media
but that's
Works,
been
because
declined.
that was going
Yeah.
that was
Yes,
going
all of those have been declined so far. In fact, the government is declining them because of monopoly concerns. But there are talks of them trying to get to basically nationalize them.
Oh
so that
yes,
they
so
will
that's
become,
so much better.
That's the alternative. So because I mean, letting them go bust, we can't have that, can we?
Yeah. Oh no, they'll just be the BFD.
And that would be ideal, wouldn't it? And so
No, that would be people at the BFD. They're not real journalists. Remember?
Oh, yeah, sure. We are the far right bogeymen who will threaten the the current established order that the media have got going. But things are going badly for them, and what they're doing with stuff like they banned comment on climate change and all other like they've got a list to say you may not comment on these issues and we will not publish dissenting opinions on these issues. It's like, well, what's the point of having a news organization?
Yeah.
If you've got a list like a long list, they have a whole page dedicated to things that they can't talk about.
They've done that with the Conversation website, which is basically a opinion website for academics. They've banned climate dissenting comments. Which why you still called the Conversation? Because
it's no conversation.
Yeah.
No, and that's the intention. So that will obviously continue to develop, but I think we'll see alternative news sources and independent news will be growing, such hopefully as our own show and as the BFD in New Zealand, and who knows, there could be other blogs and other groups that spring up, and you've got the Unshackled in Australia, and you work with a network of people there as well. But before you do all the plugs for those, I'm going to give you one. I'm going to let you pick one last topic. I think we'll take one last topic and then we will call it a night. So
yep. So there was an explosive bombshell on the weekend regarding Australian political history, because as you would be aware, 2 days before the federal election, former Labor Prime Minister Bob Hawke, he died at the age of 89. He was Prime Minister from 1983 to 1991, and it's been well known his the issues in his family throughout that time. For example, in the later part of his prime ministership, he resumed his affair with his biographer Blanche Debord, and left his wife Hazel Hawke. And in 1984, it was revealed that his daughter, Rosalind Dillon, as she's now known. She was checked into rehab for heroin addiction, and he broke down on TV, basically because that is quite takes quite a heavy toll on a family, that type of problem. And it was part of the reason why at the 1984 election he didn't perform as well as many people predicted. And there's been a lot of bio series about Bob Hawke and his family, and his children have said that we always came second to his political ambitions. Wow. And of course, when there, it's not uncommon when there is a someone high profile who's got a lot of wealth that a will is contested. So the Hawke children, they were left $750,000 each, even though the family home owned by Bob and Blanche sold for $14.5 million. So Rosalind Dillon, she is contesting the will, and she is asking for $4 million from his estate because she is on a disability support pension. Because she's got a whole lot of mental health problems, and she's alleged in a 25-page affidavit to the New South Wales Supreme Court that she was raped in the early 1980s when she worked for former Victorian Labor MP Bill Landaloo. And Bill Landaloo, he died in February this year. So Bob Hawke is reported to have said to her that you can't go to the police. I can't because I'm challenging for the leadership of the Labor Party, and I need a factional player like Bill Landaloo's support. This was in 1982. And obviously Bob Hawke and Bill Landaloo are now deceased, so Bill Landaloo can't defend himself, and Bob Hawke, he can't say whether or not that happened or not. But a lot of people are sort of making the connection 2 years later. She has a heroin addiction, drawing the connection that could be due to the trauma of this alleged. Well, she alleges she was raped several times, and so it's got a lot of people speculating whether there's obviously been a lot of talk about in other nations about child sexual abuse or she was an adult at this time, but sexual abuse that happens in political circles that's covered up by the media and the political class, what's called the media political complex, or I call it the parliamentary protection racket, because the media rely on the politicians for the juicy stories. But this is an affidavit, so it's a legal declaration, and so yes.
I wonder if it's possible that she has well, what could have happened is if she did tell other people, they could attest to this and so on. But otherwise, it becomes incredibly difficult to prove or disprove.
Her sister, Sue Peters Hawke, she has corroborated her sister's story and said that yes, we were aware at the time, and so was Bob, but it was dealt with as a family issue, not as a legal issue. Sue Peters Hawke, she's not contesting the will. She's happy with the $750,000, but respects what her sister, the course of action that her sister has taken. So obviously,
and contesting wills is always difficult, and intentionally difficult, because it was their father's money, and he can do with it what he likes. That's kind of the view that usually the legal system takes, unless somebody is in dire,
and as we've just talked about. Rosalind Dillon, her current
Exactly, and
health
so
situation.
that's potential. She probably has some kind of claim there. But Bob Hawke, I believe, was always known as a very popular prime minister. Is that right? That's, I
Well,
believe, the way
yeah,
that
he was
I've
a
seen it in New
larrikin
Zealand.
there, so everyone's sort of speculating whether Bob Hawke will be cancelled posthumously, given that, well, it's alleged that he covered up his daughter's rape
Yeah,
so that he could
correct,
become
yeah.
prime minister. And in 1971, he was named Victorian Father of the Year, which his late ex-wife Hazel called a disgrace. And so you've also got
Yeah,
that
well,
it.
even from the rest, from the rest of the stories, even if this allegation isn't true, it sounds like he was definitely not a good father, and it's
No.
so sad to see these politicians and other businessmen who pursue money and fame at the expense of their families, and having another child myself, I see more, family is what's the most important, and we should be focusing on what's best for our families and building a future. For our children, rather than trying to pile up the material wealth and fame for ourselves. That's
Yes,
that's
definitely.
just pretty tragic to see that that's what he did, and that's so common. That's I think a pretty sad indictment on what is valued by these people.
And just one more story, because the theme of this show has been how our politicians have no idea what the bureaucrats are up to. Well, unaware to the Premier of Queensland, Anastasia Palaszczuk, the Department of Education was building a new school in Fortitude Valley, which is an inner city suburb of Brisbane, and they were going to be installed with unisex toilets, with the only exception being two male and female toilets in the change room facility as well. I'm still glad they considered that. And Anastasia Palaszczuk, she's vowed she will be raising the issue with the department, believing boys and girls should have separate bathrooms. So obviously the bureaucrats have been planning this without any knowledge of any of the relevant ministers, and just decided, yeah, we'll have unisex toilets because we're living in a gender fluid
Because
age.
it's the current year. That's why.
Well, Scott
But yeah,
Morrison didn't even know that there were gender
who
neutral
are they
toilets in his
who's challenging
department.
this? The parents often don't challenge this properly. They complain, and then they go and they send their kids to the schools. And it's the same with the rugby kind of story. As people stop sending your kids to these schools, and put them in a good Christian school or homeschool them, or have some school that you're supporting, that you're a part of, and where you can actually have some influence over what happens to your children. And the problem is that there aren't enough parents who will take action against these kinds of postmodern developments, and so they will continue to happen. Right? This is only the beginning. This will only get worse, and this will come to every single school in Australia and in New Zealand, because that's their agenda, and they will not stop to achieve that agenda.
Well, the fact is, not enough parents complain, because the sad thing about modern parenting is they just delegate parenting to the schools, so they have no idea. Well, this is why the Safe Schools program was allowed to flourish, and the state of Queensland was also notable for in their sexual health classes teaching children about the genderbread person. About fluid sexuality, not gingerbread man, gingerbread person.
Yeah. And so until there are enough parents who will speak out against this and actually follow through with action, this is going to continue getting worse. And yeah, we will keep reporting on these on the show every week, every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. New Zealand time and 7 p.m. Melbourne time. We're live here on YouTube, on The Unshackled, and on Right Minds NZ. And we have Tim's got a whole lineup of other shows that he will let you know.
We should also make, because it is the 10th of December today, so in 2 weeks' time we'll be scheduled to be on Christmas Eve and then New Year's Eve. I don't know about you, but I'm not intending to broadcast on those nights. Maybe New Year's Eve, but it'll sort of be some sort of special show.
We'll talk about that a little bit more, and I'm planning to come on your Brexit show on Friday and it may even have some kind of Right Minds event that's in the works. But I'll be talking to you about that tomorrow, since I'll be going to bed right after this. But we'll discuss that, and we should have some shows on that. But yeah, I think we'll cancel the Christmas show, and we might do some kind of New Year special.
Yes, definitely. But yes, as you mentioned, I'm back tomorrow night for Wilmsfront. It's the first show in a week. I've just been taking a bit of a break because I've been working on some back-end operations. So it'll be a very exciting show tomorrow night. I've got a special guest lined up in Romeo Georges. He has become quite a popular Facebook live vlogger. He was at the Can the Plan convoy in Canberra last week, demanding that the federal government tear up the Murray-Darling Basin Plan and give the water back to the farmers. They did manage to spook the politicians, and so there is some frantic deliberations going on in the federal cabinet about looking at canning the plan, which is good. So Romeo is very passionate, so I look forward to speaking with him, and it'll be the first Wilmsfront which will stream on DLive.tv, which is a free speech blockchain live streaming platform, because we don't know whether YouTube will decide to ban us at any moment, given the new terms of service. I've done the test stream today. It worked perfectly. So I'll put a link in the description to my DLive channel, and there'll also be replays of Wilmsfront episodes on my BitChute channel, which is bitchute.com/channel/Tim Wilms. BitChute doesn't allow live streaming at this stage. They're working on it. After Wilmsfront on Wednesdays, it is a Dearborough Trans Weekly live stream at 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time. And then, of course, Thursday night, it's our weekly Uncuckables show at 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time on the dedicated channel. And then we'll be back on the Friday around about midday Melbourne time on with a special UK election live stream for the Uncuckables, which, well, it was myself and David Hiscock were the two confirmed, but Due has just said he'll be able to join us. We'll be going until we basically get an election result. But in the UK, they count the votes differently, and that all the different constituents, they tally up all the votes. They don't give progressive results. They get them up all on stage and read out the vote totals and declare the winner, and then that's it. That's who's won. And so they're all televised, and so you have these what are called perennial candidates or joke candidates who dress up in costumes so they can get on TV and get people to notice them. And it'll be busy Friday for me because I'll have another Wilmsfront at 7 p.m. Melbourne time on Friday. My guest will be Stephen Wells, debunking the climate bushfire link. There'll be a new episode of the Report from Tiger Mount with Richard Wollstonecroft coming out soon, I definitely promise. Detonation with Steel Archer, that is on hiatus at the moment. But you can see the archive of episodes at steelarcher.com and also on the Detonation YouTube channel. The Maddie Rose Live YouTube channel, that is not just the home of XYZ Live now, which is on every Monday, 9 p.m. Melbourne time, but he's also doing his own solo Maddie Rose Live streams. He started doing them on Saturday nights, which I quite like because I'm pretty tired on Saturday nights, and so I just like interacting with the comments and giving Maddie a bit of shit on his show for a change. And of course, please support the work of the Unshackled. Because we'll need it more than ever, because we're being censored on Facebook. We don't know what's going to happen with YouTube. You can go to theunshackled.net/membership or do a direct donation at theunshackled.net/donate, or also buy merchandise through our online store at theunshackled.net/store. We've still got regular content on theunshackled.net.
And you can find some more of me on rightminds.nz. You can go to /donate to support me if you'd like to do that. My content also appears on the bfd.co.nz. And we should have some videos that some of my friends and colleagues have taken on the March for Life that took place on Saturday last week. And so they've got some good interviews that I'll be uploading, and there's a few more articles coming through since I have a little bit of downtime at the moment to polish a few things off. So I might have a little bit of content out at the end of the year, since things are going well with Amy and our new baby at the moment.
Which is great to hear. And you're still managing to get enough sleep?
Yes, a reasonable amount. Usually, we get a good solid 5 hours at least, plus a few extra hours here and there. So that's not too bad. I've heard some people getting a lot less than that. So
we've obviously been blessed with wonderful children.
Yes, that's right. Very, 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 very happy. And Amy does an amazing job. Very happy.
She's lovely as well.
All right, well, that's the end of tonight's show. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will catch you next Tuesday. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Trans-Tasman Talk. To keep up with the latest real news and analysis from the Tasman nations, visit theunshackled.net and rightminds.nz.